we are getting flashes now that the PMLA court has issued a non-bailable warrant against Vijay Mallya. Now, up until the longest time, lawyers maintained that all that the banks want is Mallya's money, and defaulting on a loan is not reason enough to arrest someone. I mean, you don't arrest people for failing an exam, but you can only arrest them if they were corrupt, if they kind of bribed the invigilator. But now the PMLA court has issued this non-bailable warrant because the ED has conclusively proved, or has at least prima facie evidence, that indeed some laws were flouted, that of the 940 crore, which was the last tranche of loans given by the banks, the last one by IDBI, 430 crore were used for purposes other than they were intended, and that foreign properties were bought. On that argument, a non-bailable warrant has been issued against Vijay Mallya by the PMLA court. We have to see now whether Mr. Mallya adheres to this, or whether he takes recourse in a UK court, which would be extremely unlikely. Because if he does that, then he will perhaps permanently find it difficult to return to the country. It's unlikely he would do that. Chances are he would go on appeal to a higher court against the PMLA court's non-bailable warrant. We will have to see how things turn from here on, because we got that press statement from the UB group saying that the monies were used exactly for the purposes intended, and that this charge from the ED has come out of nowhere. So far, no such a charge had been levied. We'll have to wait and see how the PMLA court's verdict is taken by Mallya, as well as by the higher court as well, whether the appeal itself is allowed. I think we have Naveen, our correspondent, joining us on the line. He has been, of course, getting us the news from the courts. Naveen, anything else that the judges observed? Naveen?
Naveen, if you can hear us, are you with us on the line? Okay, we'll try and repatch that line, but clearly it seems that if I could use that, proverbial sense without trying to sound sensational about this, the news does seem to be tightening, perhaps, Lata, because we saw the developments over the weekend where the suspension of the passport has been now ordered by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's been given 1 week time to reply as to why the passport should not be completely revoked. And in addition, of course, the fact that he has not appeared despite 3 summons that were issued to him by the Enforcement Directorate, and now a non-bailable warrant. The only question perhaps that, we'll put forward to some of the legal experts once we get them on the show is, I remember that a couple of other high courts also had issued non-bailable warrants in different cases. There were distinct tax evasion or alleged tax evasion cases. One was a check bouncing case. Despite those non-bailable warrants, Mr. Mallya continued with his travels and his plans. So now with this additional NBW being issued by the PMLA court, whether that at all changes the course of the legal nature of the scrutiny that is underway by multiple agencies. Just to recount, of course, we're talking about the CBI here, we're talking about the SFIO here, we're talking about the Enforcement Directorate here, and of course the cases which are ongoing, including the one in the Supreme Court.
In the initial case, when the banks filed a suit against Mallya in the Supreme Court, asking that his passport be apprehended so that he doesn't leave the country, at that time, Mukul Rohatgi himself told me in an interview that the banks don't want his arrest, that they only wanted his money. But that was, however, a bank default case.
Yeah.
This is a money laundering case.
We're talking about the prevention of money laundering.
Yeah, which is quite clearly a way more serious charge. So if there is prima facie evidence from the ED that money has indeed been laundered, then this is a very, very serious charge. So this is a different kind of case. You default on a loan, that's a civil matter. But money laundering becomes a criminal charge, and therefore a non-bailable warrant would be justified. Now it will depend on the strength of the ED's evidence. Ashvin Parekh, the managing partner of Ashvin Parekh Advisory Services, joins us. Mr. Parekh, is there any way out for Mr. Mallya? Now has the news tightened, as Surabhi said, and he will have to appear?
Well, I mean, there are 2 aspects to this, Lata, if you really examine the developments. One is the news is tightening around, Mr. Mallya. And, I mean, more than anything else, the allegations will have to be established by the ED. So that's one part of it. But I'm more equally concerned about the banking system because, at least earlier, I mean, this is a new dimension that the entire argument is taking. Earlier, the question was whether the offer made by Mr. Mallya to the banking system was adequate or otherwise, or whether that offer could be enhanced. So there was a recovery issue rather than an issue of crime, of or punishing someone for a totally different thing altogether. It's not default any longer. It's a different dimension. Now, I mean, as I said, more than the borrower, more than let's say, because that's one of the cases. I'm more concerned about the banking system because 4,000 crores or 6,000 crores is not a small amount.
No, I take your point, Mr. Parekh, but now the matter has gone out of the bank's hands altogether. The ED's charge is not the banker's charge at all. Bankers have always said that their argument against Mallya is that he has more money than he has returned to them. Yes, his business went bad. They don't argue about him defaulting on the loan. Their point is you are a willful defaulter because you had money and you are not paying back our money. You are not a willful defaulter because you misspent the money. They never made that charge. The bankers never charged that he misspent the money. This is a charge coming from the ED and it comes at a very high level, accusing him of money laundering. So obviously now the case is not banks versus Mallya, but quite clearly Government of India versus Mallya or ED versus Mallya. As you very clearly say, now that jeopardizes the possible 4 or 6,000 crores that they may have got. Mr. Jain Gupta is also with us. Mr. Gupta, we spoke to you a little while ago. Now the court's hint has become a reality. A non-bailable warrant has been issued. Is this the last straw on the camel's back? You mean he will have to come back?
See, there is nothing the last straw because non-bailable warrant can be challenged in the higher court.
Okay.
Now, it is dependent upon whether the higher court will agree or not. As I see from the present case, it is very clear that the courts mean business now. And courts have already taken into account that the 3 chances that ED has already given to Mr. Mallya to appear. So, in my opinion, they would have, the counsel for Mr. Mallya would have argued for natural justice and blah, blah. The court would have said that we have given enough opportunity for natural justice. It is not necessary that natural justice opportunity has to be given at each and every level multiple times. So, having said that, the issue, as I was discussing, I was hearing Mr. Parekh, the issue is very clearly that there are separate proceedings. One is the criminal proceeding, other is the recovery proceedings, and third are other proceedings regarding non-payment of PF, tax and all the things. There are multiple proceedings. Now, each one is independent of other. In this case, it is a proceeding which is against the criminal misconduct that is alleged against Mr. Mallya for money laundering.
But legally, what does the higher court do? Does it actually sift the ED's evidence and check out whether there is enough evidence of money laundering? Or will it just say that we accept the ED's evidence and...
if it has gone to the courts, any of the court of the law, the court obviously will look into the evidence that is produced before it and the arguments made by both the sides. And after weighing the evidence that is produced in the form of papers and hearing the argument from both the sides, then the court will decide. No court will ever decide based on something unless it will be the ex parte order.
Sure.
Okay.
Mr. Parekh, sir, if I could come in over here, just help us understand how the legalities are going to continue from here on. As Lata was also pointing out, you were pointing out, we're talking about multiple proceedings in different courts, right from the, bankers case, which is in the Apex Court, to the DRT, to the Karnataka High Court. There were earlier other high courts that had issued different non-bailable warrants for entirely different cases. As Lata was pointing out, there was a check bouncing case. He was issued an NBW even there. So my question is in 2 parts. First of all, assuming that there is no relief granted by a higher court on the current non-bailable warrant, which has been issued today, what happens then? What does this NBW mean for Vijay Mallya? And secondly, how will parallel proceedings continue? Because what Mr. Mallya and his aides have been saying is several forums, they've tried to say that they are presenting a lot of facts before the Apex Court. Therefore, they were seeking time from the ED, from the lower court, saying we're anyway presenting our case in the Supreme Court of India. So therefore, we should be given more time. Does that hold water at all, that sort of an argument?
True. So, I mean, to my mind, what will now happen is that the allegations, the list of allegations is now becoming longer. originally, if the allegations were only of the nature of default and that's what the banking system was after, now the allegations, the list is growing. Now, therefore, the courts will have no choice but to examine each one of these allegations and the evidence produced by different organizations. I mean, including the investigation agency on one side, the banking system on the other, the contractual arrangement that the borrower had with the banking system. So all that will have to be, I mean, for example, we kept on saying, we don't know sitting here today, we can't judge, what is the strength of collaterals that the banking system possesses, for instance,
Mr. Parekh, can you hold on for a minute, please? Our correspondent, we have been able to touch base with him. He could have more interesting details on which we would like your comments. Naveen has joined us. Naveen, what all have you picked up? All that we know is the PMLA court has rejected the KFA application against being summoned by the ED, and they have issued a non-bailable warrant. Anything more?
So, Rata, I'll give you a perspective on what actually transpired in the court today, in the PMLA court today. So, after a round of arguments and counter-arguments, Mr. Amit Desai, who represented the Kingfisher from the Kingfisher side, had argued of the fact that, as we remember on Saturday, the ED lawyer had pressed on the fact that there were chances of out of the 950 crore IDBI loan that was given to Kingfisher Airlines, around 430 crore was siphoned off and bought properties of which it was used to buy properties in outside India. So Amit Desai today clearly argued on that fact, and he had denied that fact, but ultimately the judge didn't take any of that, and the judge rejected the application by Kingfisher Airlines against the NBW petition filed by Enforcement Directorate. Also, the Enforcement Directorate lawyer clearly pointed out that although KFA officials have been visiting the Enforcement Directorate time and again, but they haven't been able to give any kind of cooperation and give clear answers on specific questions to the Enforcement Directorate. So on this ground, they wanted the physical presence of Vijay Mallya in India, and that is the reason why they were asking for a non-bailable warrant.
Okay. Well, even then, a non-bailable warrant is a fairly significant charge of money laundering. In any case, Naveen, hold on. We have a battery of experts and lawyers with us. The senior advocate, Hitesh Jain, has also joined in. Hitesh, now what is the likely set of options available to Vijay Mallya? Has he is the option only to surrender? Is the option to go to a higher court, and does he stand a decent chance there? Or is it that he can even seek amnesty in the UK?
Once he refuses to cooperate with the investigation and does not present himself before the authorities, even if he will, he has the option to go to the higher court, but he is unlikely to get any relief in view of his own conduct, because he was summoned thrice, he did not cooperate, and therefore he has invited this action. Second thing is, there is already his passport is suspended and he has to give the response because he runs the risk of revocation of passport. Third, the only viable option
Hitesh, for not appearing before the ED, can you issue a non-bailable warrant? Should not the non-bailable warrant be issued because you already have some fairly sound evidence of money laundering?
Well, even if...
if that evidence is weak, for instance, if the higher court...
For mere non-appearance, no NBW warrant is issued, but when you have been summoned thrice and you do not appear, then in the past also there have been precedent where the ED has approached the special court and have obtained non-bailable warrant against the people. So this is not one of the case where, mere non-appearance...
No, let me literally take the devil's case in at this point in time. Assuming the charges of money laundering are flimsy, and Mallya is therefore, the only charge against him is that he did not answer to the summons which were issued 3 times in a row. Is that charge enough for non-bailable warrant? Can Mallya argue that the evidence of money laundering against him are flimsy? Can he take refuge, and can the court give him refuge on those grounds?
2 answers. First, this non-appearance is good enough for charge for issuance of non-bailable warrant, and all this evidence and all what he's talking is he has to remain present for interrogation and then submit. He cannot dictate the interrogation authorities sitting from the foreign jurisdiction because he has been personally summoned to be a part of investigation. And if you will and any part of investigation, as any investigation we can understand, the presence of accused is very important because that is where you can ask for clarification. Therefore, there you can ask him in great details. I mean, through sending papers to someone or making an intervention application and all is a bad tactics. I mean, the more tactics he will entertain, he will indulge. Like, for example, today's filing of this intervention application was absolutely bad idea because, you give a message that you are very arrogant. You are outside the country, you are making intervention application, you are saying that I will sit outside and you examine my evidence. Investigation does not work on that basis.
So,
investigation requires the presence of the person before the investigating authority.
Okay, Hitesh, just hold on there. Let me also get Mr. Parekh back into the conversation. Mr. Parekh, could you concur? And my simple question, given the developments over the last 24 to 48 hours, do you think now Mallya has no choice but to come back to India and appear before the authorities? What is the probability of his return now? Has it gone up significantly in the last 2 days?
It has, certainly it has. I mean, certainly I'll go by, certainly what Hitesh has to say about this. He has to do it. I suppose the idea, the whole aspect of his going away from the country and then trying to do the entire conduct from outside of the country in itself now can be seen as a big mistake. Okay. But once again, I suppose we're moving away from the main issue. You see, the issue was that of recovery.
Yep.
So I suppose the only worry that, let's say, one should have is that the banking system should not be the loser. I mean, what happens to Mr. Mallya if he was actually involved with any siphoning or any crime, and if he has to be punished for that is a very different subject. I'm not getting into that. All I'm saying is that the bank's chances of recovery are now getting dragged, and we've seen this in the past. Whenever there is any intervention, of this nature, it takes very long, for the process to get properly concluded.
Okay. Well, point taken. Actually, we have to leave it at that. Hitesh Jain, Mr. Gupta and Ashvin Parekh, thank you very much for joining us.